What happens when a king who brings his realm to its greatest territorial height is ultimately brought down by his own family? I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in episode 38 we will uncover how Alfonso III of Asturias expanded his kingdom, only to face rebellions and betrayal that ended his dynasty's unity. The end of Musa ibn Musa. Let's look at the final years of a figure we have already seen in more than one episode, Musa ibn Musa, patriarch of the Banu Qasi clan. In 860, Emir Muhammad of Córdoba dismissed this mu'alad, a Muslim of native origin, as governor of Zaragoza and the Upper March, coinciding with an emiral campaign. According to Arabic chronicles, after paying ransom to the Vikings for his release, King García Íñiguez of Pamplona allied with King Ordoño of Asturias to raid Islamic lands. For that reason, the emir launched a major military operation against Navarre, and Andalusi troops spent an entire month destroying villages, ravaging fields, and occupying castles. In one of those castles, García Íñiguez's eldest son, Fortun Diwanite, was captured. He spent many years as one of those well-treated captives in Córdoba, a reminder that the emirs considered the whole peninsula legitimately theirs, and viewed the rulers of Pamplona as rebels on the same level as any Muslim who defied them. Fortun was accompanied by his young daughter Oneka, who married the Umayyad prince Abdallah, later emir, making her the grandmother of Caliph Abdelrahman III. Having lost the broad authority he once enjoyed, Musa ibn Musa returned to his rebellious ways and stopped obeying the emir of Córdoba. Muhammad realized it had been a mistake to give so much power to the ambitious patriarch of the Banu Qasi, and he began strengthening other lineages in the Upper March. The most notable of these were the Banu Tujib, an Arab family that had participated in the Muslim conquest of Iberia and had until then lived in Daroca, in Zaragoza province. With the emir's support, they founded and fortified Calatayud in 862. The Tujibites began raiding Banu Qasi domains in La Rioja and Tudela, and in this context Musa went to Guadalajara, where the Berber Banu Salim clan ruled, to offer Governor Azraq his daughter in marriage and rebel against the emir. When Muhammad learned of this, he rebuked Azraq for marrying Musa's daughter, but the governor clearly attached little political weight to the marriage, answering, quote, "How could it hurt you if your ally sleeps with your enemy's daughter? If this marriage can draw him to your obedience, I will allow it. If not, I will fight at your side." End quote. When the rebellious mu'alad realized that Azraq had no intention of rebelling against the emir, Musa marched against him with his men. Musa was wounded in the clash and died from his injuries a few days later on his way to Tudela. I wonder how Musa's daughter felt about her father's death, and what it was like to remain married for life to the man responsible for it. But as always, the chroniclers of the time paid little attention to women or emotional matters. Sources disagree about which son succeeded him and what was his attitude towards Córdoba, but Jesús Lorenzo Jiménez, who studied the Banu Qasi in depth, concluded from later events that Lup was the successor and that he remained obedient for about a decade, until the fitna of the Emirate of Córdoba once again allowed the Banu Qasi to play a leading role in the affairs of the Upper March. The conditions of Asturian expansion. What factors explain the expansion of the Asturian monarchy starting under King Ordoño? We need to look at both environmental and political factors. In the 6th and 7th centuries, the so-called Late Antique Little Ice Age brought harsh winters, dry seasons, and frequent famines. By the 8th century, Galicia enjoyed warmer, more favorable conditions that encouraged Mediterranean crops. Even so, the ecosystems of Galicia and the Cantabrian Mountains were very different from the drier, flatter landscape of the northern Meseta, which made it a challenge for the Asturian monarchy to rule over such diverse environments, each with its own agricultural and livestock practices. Recall from episode 30, the era of Charlemagne, Spanish March, and Carolingian Empire, that this was a time when forests still dominated the European landscape. But in the 9th century, a process of agricultural and demographic expansion began throughout Europe, one that intensified in the Central Middle Ages before being interrupted by a new climate change and the Black Death. So the Asturian expansion must be placed in this broader context. The medieval warm period is thought to have begun between 900 and 950 across Western Europe, with temperatures similar to today's and moderate to frequent rainfall depending on the region. However, by the second half of the 9th century, written records and paleo-environmental data already show developments in Asturian agriculture, new lands being colonized, forests cleared, and in general greater human intervention in the environment. Still, many more studies are needed to complete the picture of early medieval Iberia. Asturian expansion was also aided by the weakness of the Emirate of Córdoba, which left the political integration of stateless communities uncontested. Elites from the Douro Basin, and even rebellious Andalusi chieftains, look at Oviedo as a viable political alternative to Córdoba. The integration of new elites into the Kingdom of Asturias, or alternatively of foreign aristocrats into local structures, occurred through different means: military conquest, political agreements and marriages, political networks based on military obligations, redistribution of land and control over common lands, the exercise of justice, and church patronage and monumental construction as markers of social prestige and dominance. The birth of the County of Castile. Castile, later so central to Spanish history, originally referred to the area of Las Merindades in northern Burgos province. This territory became part of the Kingdom of Asturias during the reign of Alfonso I. Starting with the reign of Ordoño I of Asturias, Castile began to consolidate, first being organized as a county. The first known count of Castile was Rodrigo, a man likely close to the royal family. He also became Count of Álava as a reward for suppressing a revolt in that territory. The first record we have of Count Rodrigo of Castile is from 860, when after León, Astorga and Tui had been integrated into the Kingdom of Asturias, he was tasked with incorporating Amaya, the former capital of the Visigothic province of Cantabria. Unlike León or Astorga, Amaya likely had to be repopulated and rebuilt almost from scratch, as it had been a stronghold destroyed during the Islamic conquest. Amaya had been defended by Peter of Cantabria, and his son Alfonso, son-in-law of Pelagius, later became king. So Amaya held special symbolic significance for the Asturian monarchy. Shortly before this, King Ordoño had neutralized the threat of the fortress of Albelda in La Rioja, dangerously close to Castilian domains, thereby regaining control of the strategic Pancorbo Gorge, the gateway into Comital Castile and the route used at the time by Muslim expeditions to attack the kingdom's eastern flank. Also in 860, Ordoño led a raiding campaign as far south as Coria in Extremadura, while troops under Count Rodrigo attacked the fortress of Talamanca in the Middle March, north of Madrid. In both cases, the defenders were executed, and the civilian population was enslaved and sold at auction, most likely becoming part of the poorly documented servile population of the astur-leonese kingdom. Yet, despite the later praise of Castilian epic songs, which immortalized Rodrigo, in reality he suffered defeat after defeat in defending Castile from Muslim attacks. In the summer of 863, Emir Muhammad sent one of his sons to campaign in the counties of Álava and Castile, both ruled by Rodrigo. Arab chroniclers report that the campaign was victorious for the Muslims, who inflicted heavy casualties in a mountain pass, including the deaths of several notable figures. 2 years later, there was a large-scale mobilization led by Muhammad's heir Al-Mundir. The invaders freely burned houses and crops and destroyed assault works, likely Salinas de Añana in Álava. The Cordovan army then had to bypass the well-defended Pancorbo Gorge and instead march through the Hoz de la Morcuera, on the border of La Rioja and Burgos, where they clashed with Rodrigo's forces. Arab chroniclers say Rodrigo's troops camped in front of a trench that the count had spent years deepening with the required labor of the Castilian people. These defenses led to a pitched battle, the Battle of the Morcuera, which raged for several days but again ended with many Christians killed or captured. In 866, another destructive campaign hit Álava and Castile. We're told that Rodrigo struggled to muster troops as the people were demoralized and weakened by raids, killings, and the famine caused by the previous year's crop destruction. Famine spread across Iberia the following year. When Rodrigo died in 873, the county of Castile passed to his son, Diego Rodríguez, while Álava was governed by another magnate. The internal crisis of the Emirate of Córdoba, which deepened in the second half of Muhammad's reign, gave the Kingdom of Asturias some breathing room. This allowed for significant progress in political integration and the colonization of new lands farther south under Alfonso III of Asturias. For example, in 884, Count Diego Rodríguez founded Burgos, advancing the eastern frontier of the kingdom to the Arlanzón River and soon after to the Arlanza River. He also built the castle of Pancorbo to strengthen the defenses of the gorge, while Count Munio Núñez constructed the castle of Castrojeriz, west of Burgos. In 885, the monastery of San Pedro de Cardeña was founded, and Christians captured the castle of Grañón, on the western edge of La Rioja. However, this stronghold was disputed and reoccupied by the Banu Qasi until it returned permanently to Castilian hands in 924. But again, in 885, Castile was shaken by the political turmoil of Alfonso III's later reign, and Count Diego Rodríguez died under violent circumstances, possibly in connection with either a conflict against the Banu Qasi or a revolt by a king's brother. After Rodrigo's son died, Comital authority in Castile was divided among smaller counties until Castile was reunified under Fernán González in 932. Here I need to pause on one of the key ideas I want you to take away from this episode. From an anachronistic perspective, we speak of counts of, whereas as historians Gonzalo Martínez Díez and Carlos Estepa Díez rightly point out, the primary sources show them as counts in. This distinction matters because the title of count was not really tied to a particular city, fortress, or territory. Instead, it was a dignity granted to a person, who might govern a larger or a smaller territory depending on circumstances. This was also true for kings. Although we speak of kings of Asturias, it will be more accurate to say kings in Asturias, León, Galicia, etc. As we will see in this episode from the division of the Kingdom of Asturias, the territory could change, but the authority of the title remained central. The patrimonial conception of the state back then had little in common with today's collective and national idea of a state. Settlement and power in Comital Castile. Let's look at the territory and society of Castile at this time and how power structures gradually centralized under the protection of the astur-leonese monarchy, because without that, it's hard to understand the political history of the kingdom's eastern lands. The society of the County of Castile was made up of free landowners, dependent serfs, and migrants from the Cantabrian Range and Vasconic territories, alongside the bulk of the population, which was native to the area before its integration into the Asturian monarchy. Conquered by Islamic arms, Comital Castile had earlier Berber and Arab influence than nearby La Rioja, which had been subdued by pact. Among the 300 names of peasant landowners found in Castilian documents from the first half of the 10th century, 15 to 20% were Arabic names such as Tariq, Suleiman, or Mutarrif, a situation similar to what we find in León or Old Catalonia. Just as there were Christian populations Arabized at least in name, Jews are also documented at this time. So the social reality of Castile and of the Kingdom of Asturias in general was more diverse than is often imagined. In contrast with the society after the year 1000, early medieval Castilian society was simpler, with fewer inequalities and weaker institutions. Fragmentation of property was the norm, as in the Carolingian Wall. It was rare for an aristocrat or ecclesiastical institution to hold vast estates or entire villages. The varied landscape of 9th and 10th century Castile featured villages alongside scattered settlements, simple castles, monasteries, and communal lands. But there was nothing resembling a city between the 5th century and the 11th century, when Burgos began to grow. Castilian charters from the first half of the 10th century include the term alfoz, of Arabic origin, meaning district. These were the basic units of Castilian territorial organization. According to historian Julio Escalona, the areas of control of the alfoces were originally very limited and did not expand and consolidate at each other's expense until the 11th and 12th centuries. In other words, the fortresses, churches, and monasteries structured in Castile in this period did not have a wide sphere of influence. Important local political and cultural differences existed within small geographic areas in early medieval Iberia. For example, archaeology shows that at the time there were, in practice, two Alabas with different levels of social complexity, divided by the Bayas River. Thus, in the political space of Álava and Castile, everything was highly local. This made it convenient to fragment political authority in Castile after Diego Rodríguez's death, since there were multiple power centers in Burgos, Lantarón, Amaya, Cerezo, and Lara, none of which were cities. This political reality was a legacy of the earlier stateless situation, without urban centers capable of centralizing the territory. Only over time did these lands become better integrated and participate in larger-scale politics, especially from the 10th century onward. In political entities with weak, uneven territorial structures and a low degree of formalized state power, such as the Kingdom of Asturias, military campaigns, kinship and patron-client ties, and the social and geographic mobility of elites were key to holding the kingdom together. The case of the Counts of Lantarón is interesting. As Julio Escalona has studied, they often sought legitimacy from the distant astur-leonese monarchy. Archaeology shows why. The Lantarón region, in western Álava, lacked major castles, and its counts did not have great wealth. The monarchy thus helped these local elites build their authority. This construction of client networks beyond the local and regional level benefited both sides, increasing their power. This gradually strengthened the internal hierarchies of society and led to greater social inequalities. Alfonso the Great, king in Asturias. King Alfonso III of Asturias did not have a peaceful beginning to his reign. When his father Ordoño died in May 866, after suffering from gout for several years, the young heir had to confront a claimant in Galicia. Count Fruela of Lugo advanced with an army to Oviedo and proclaimed himself king, perhaps legitimized by marrying a woman of the royal dynasty, while Alfonso had to take refuge in the county of Castile under the protection of Count Rodrigo. According to the first Castilian annals, only a few months passed before Alfonso's loyalists, led by Rodrigo, killed the usurper, and by late 866, King Alfonso was able to return to Oviedo. Not long after, there was an uprising in Vasconia that was suppressed without much trouble. In 875, there was another revolt by some nobles of Lugo, who were executed. Apart from these disruptions, internally, the first half of Alfonso's reign was relatively calm. Alfonso was fortunate to rule during a very favorable historical moment for Christian expansion. The Neo-Gothic Reconquista ideology developed in the Asturian Chronicles is something I won't revisit here, since I discussed it in detail in episode 24, The Reconquista is a Lie, Here is Why. It's enough to recall that this ideological narrative of reconquest, that the Kingdom of Asturias was the heir to the Visigothic kingdom, and that Alfonso III intended to expel the Muslims from Iberia, emerged forcefully in the 880s precisely because the Emirate of Córdoba was going through an extremely difficult period internally, which created a triumphant spirit in the Asturian court. In addition to expanding the political frontiers of the Kingdom of Asturias, the monarch achieved notable victories against the Umayyads and supported the rebellions of various mu'alads of al-Andalus, such as Ibn Marwan of Badajoz, whom he hosted in Oviedo. An Umayyad campaign in 878 against León and Astorga ended in disaster for Córdoba and became Alfonso's greatest triumph. Two separate Umayyad armies advanced, and the Asturian king decisively crushed one of them at the Battle of Polvoraria. When the other army, commanded by the heir Al-Mundir, learned of the defeat and began to retreat, they too were reportedly surprised and routed. The following year, the emir sent a fleet against the Kingdom of Asturias in retaliation, but it was destroyed by a storm. These military setbacks, combined with revolts, meant that for the first time, the Umayyads themselves sought to negotiate peace terms. Internally, the monarch of Oviedo wielded the power to appoint counts, bishops, and abbots at will, demanding oaths of loyalty from them, setting a precedent for the feudalization of society. Alfonso was also a builder king. He sponsored the foundation of numerous monasteries and churches, as well as castles and fortifications. The Asturian monarchy also commissioned goldsmithing and jewelry, evidence that it had begun to accumulate considerable wealth, something that may have stirred aristocratic envy and fueled the noble uprisings that became more frequent as Alfonso's reign advanced. Alfonso the Great's fame even reached Rome, as we have letters from the Pope requesting military aid and horses to counter Muslim advances in southern Italy. As for foreign policy, in 869, Alfonso III of Asturias married Jimena, who has been supposed either to be the daughter of King García Íñiguez of Pamplona or a Frankish princess, since San Piro's Chronicle states that Jimena was related to King Charles the Bald. Frankish chronicles also mention the good relation between the Asturian king, the king of West Francia, and the Count of Bordeaux. What does this mean? It means the astur-leonese kingdom was not the isolated, autarkic realm it has often been portrayed as. Even though it was small, poor, and peripheral, it was connected to broader European politics and the economy, with maritime trade through ports like Gauzón and merchants traveling as far as France and the British Isles. Expansion on the western flank, the counties of Portugal and Coimbra. In the 850s, the Kingdom of Asturias began incorporating the northernmost parts of what is now Portugal, such as Chaves. But Alfonso III made spectacular advances, closely tied to rebellions within the Emirate of Córdoba. A Muslim named Sadun al-Surumbaki, Lord of Porto, sought the protection of the King of Oviedo, and likely handed over the city in exchange for concessions. In 868, Bimara Pérez, son of a Galician magnate, replaced him as governor of Porto and the surrounding lands between the Miño and Douro rivers. Under the Pérez family, Porto flourished. By the late 9th century, it had a bishopric that replaced the long-declining Suebic capital of Braga. Bimara Pérez also built a monastery and a fortress that became the nucleus of the city of Guimares, turning it into a stronghold for his family. The county of Portugal has often been viewed as the precursor of the Kingdom of Portugal, but because it belonged to the astur-leonese monarchy, Portuguese nationalism has tended to overlook this period. Meanwhile, Sadun al-Surumbaki sought Alfonso's permission to assist the rebel Mualat Ibn Marwan in Badajoz. This way, Alfonso the Great didn't need to use his own troops and could rely on Muslim allies to trouble the Umayyads. The Berber clan of the Banu Danis, then loyal to the emir, controlled Coimbra and its region, but Sadun expelled them to Alcácer do Sal and went on to sack and occupy Lisbon with Ibn Marwan. They dealt the Umayyads such defeats that they even captured the Hajib, the emir's powerful right-hand man, who was presented to King Alfonso. After 2 years in captivity, he was released when the Emir of Córdoba paid part of the hefty ransom demanded and handed over hostages as guarantees of the full payment. In 877, Emir Muhammad sent his heir Al-Mundir to crush Ibn Marwan's rebels in Badajoz and then advance to undo the Asturian territorial gains in northern Portugal. The Umayyad army besieged Porto, defended by Hermenegildo Gutiérrez, son-in-law of Gatono del Bierzo, the magnate who had incorporated Astorga into the Asturian kingdom. Hermenegildo held out until reinforcements arrived and defeated the Muslims. Thanks to this victory and the simultaneous triumph at Porboraria, Hermenegildo Gutiérrez pushed the Asturian frontier farther south by conquering Coimbra in 878, incorporating cities like Lamego and Viseu as well. Though Hermenegildo brought settlers from Galicia, under Astur-leonese rule, Coimbra retained a substantial Arabized Christian population and even some Muslims, as shown by records from the monastery of Lorbao between 900 and 1100, in which 1/3 of the names are Arabic. Coimbra was very far from the Asturian centers of power, and this was the frontier society over which Hermenegildo and his descendants ruled, a reality that persisted even after the city was retaken by Andalusi forces during the late 10th century. In the western sector of the Kingdom of Asturias, territorial advances could be larger and achieved with fewer obstacles because the area was peripheral and far from Muslim power centers, unlike Castile, which was only a few miles from strong Islamic fortresses. In any case, the important point is that by the end of Alfonso III's reign, the Kingdom of Asturias controlled most of the northern Douro Basin. On the western flank, it also incorporated the territories between the Douro and the Mondego rivers. Thus, by the late 9th century, all of Galicia and the northern third of Portugal were in Asturian hands. Ibn al-Qitt and the Day of Zamora. During the 890s, the kingdom's frontiers expanded as far as Zamora, Dueñas, Simancas, and Toro, so the Douro River also became the border in the central sector. Though unimportant before 893, Zamora's elites benefited when they submitted to Alfonso, along with Mozarabs from Toledo who revitalized the city's life. Zamora immediately became a bishopric firmly controlled by the Asturian monarchy, and the fort was a stronghold protecting the Leonese lands, while its surrounding region maintained a network of Visigothic-era hill forts that remained inhabited and effectively structured much of the Douro Basin. But these Christian advances were not welcomed by nearby Muslims, such as the Berbers of the Nafza tribe settled between the Tagus and Guadiana rivers in central Iberia, who suffered raids from the Asturians. At the same time, an ascetic man who acted as a go-between in alliance attempts between the Banu Qasi and the Andalusi rebel Umar ibn Hafsun encouraged a great-grandson of Emir Hisham, known as Ibn al-Qitt, to rise up against Emir Abdallah of Córdoba. With the ascetics' propaganda backing him, in 901 Ibn al-Qitt left Córdoba to preach and rally Berber groups from the Guadiana and the western part of al-Andalus, soon joined by Berbers from other regions. It wasn't hard to win their support by proclaiming jihad against the Christian infidels, a message especially compelling to those living on the frontier, who saw that Emir Abdallah was no longer able to defend Islam's borders. Ibn al-Qitt's goal was clearly to gather a great army, win victories against the Christians to gain prestige, and use that reputation to dethrone Abdallah in Córdoba. But this Umayyad wasn't just any pretender, he went so far as to present himself as the Mahdi. Remember, that's the messianic figure in Islamic history claimed by some as a savior of souls before the end of the world, and the Berbers often fell for such claims. Claiming to be the Mahdi worked because he performed magic tricks, passing them off as miracles. With his charisma and anti-Christian message, he gathered a massive army, according to Ibn Hayyan, some 60,000 foot soldiers and horsemen. On the march to Zamora, he held a review of the army, and it became clear the supposed prophet was not much of a rider, costing him prestige. Some Berber leaders began regretting their support for Ibn al-Qitt, fearing they might lose power over their clans to this Umayyad. Still, the fanatical army pushed forward, convinced by his promises that the walls of Zamora would crumble as soon as he appeared before them. Obviously, this didn't happen. Instead, the Umayyad prophet sent a letter to the Asturian king inviting him to convert to Islam or perish. Alfonso himself had come to Zamora, reinforcing its garrison after hearing about Ibn al-Qitt, and furious at the Muslim leader's arrogance, ordered his troops to attack. But the first clash went poorly for the Christians, who were forced back inside Zamora's walls. That was when Berber chiefs, now regretting the expedition, abandoned the battlefield, returned to camp, and spread false news that the Muslims had been defeated. Panic spread, causing a chaotic rout. The Christians seized this golden opportunity to counterattack. Many Muslims fled the camp during the night, though Ibn al-Qitt still promised victory, and some loyal followers remained with him in a fight that dragged on for 2 more days. Realizing all was lost, Ibn al-Qitt and his staunch supporters launched a suicidal charge and were killed in what became known as the Day of Zamora in July 901. The Christians looted what was left of the camp, cut off the Umayyad pretender's head, and hung it on Zamora's gate, specifically on Balborraz Street, from the Arabic Bab al-Ras, meaning Gate of the Head, in memory of this historic episode. Revolts and Conspiracies, the division of the Kingdom of Asturias. The second half of Alfonso's reign was marked by revolts and conspiracies against him. According to the Chronicle of San Piro, a brother of the king tried to kill him. When the plot was uncovered, he fled to Castile, where he was captured and blinded. Other conspirators included the Count of Chaves and another of the king's brothers. It is said this other brother took Astorga and the fortress of Castroventosa, holding them for 7 years with the aid of Muslim mercenaries. He later took refuge in Muslim lands beyond the Mondego River, perhaps among the men of Ibn Marwan, since that rebel Mualad leader had broken off friendly ties with the Asturian king after Alfonso carried out a massacre at the Muslim castle near Badajoz. This explains reports of an attack on Coimbra. But Alfonso the Great eventually put down the rebellions of his relatives, sparing their lives but confiscating their estates. In the following year, a magnate from León tried to assassinate the king, but was captured and dispossessed. A possible brother of Hermenegildo Gutiérrez also broke his oath, and his properties were seized as well. The most serious uprising, however, was that of a certain Duke Witiza, which lasted around 7 years. For the 4th or 5th time, the rebellion erupted in Galicia. Alfonso III tasked his mayor of the palace and Count of Coimbra, Hermenegildo Gutiérrez, with the difficult mission of rallying loyal Galician aristocrats to fight Witiza. By 895, the rebels were subdued. Witiza was imprisoned for life, and his estates were redistributed to the king's faithful, especially the diocese of Iria Flavia Santiago de Compostela and Hermenegildo Gutiérrez himself, whose family became the wealthiest and most powerful in the western flank. For reasons we don't fully know, Galician nobles showed considerable disaffection toward Alfonso the Great throughout his reign, perhaps because they felt under-rewarded for their services, or unhappy about the growing power of the bishopric of Santiago de Compostela, which was firmly under Oviedo's control. The monarchy ultimately prevailed, tightening its hold on territory through frontier expansion and redistributing rebel estates to loyalists. But Alfonso III's gravest internal crisis came at the end of his reign. Returning from a campaign in response to a request for aid from Toledo's governor, in the fall of 909, Alfonso the Great discovered a plot by one of his own servants to assassinate him, in fact instigated by his eldest son, Garcia. The servant was executed, and the king proceeded to Zamora to arrest Garcia, who was imprisoned under close watch in Gauzón Castle. In Castile, the Count of Amaya, who was the father-in-law of Garcia, rose in defense of his claims. And according to San Piro's chronicle, all 3 of the king's sons joined forces in rebellion to depose their father. Faced with this, Alfonso III of Asturias had no choice but to abdicate. The retired king may have made a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela shortly before dying in Zamora in 910. At that point, the division of the Kingdom of Asturias became official, in Carolingian style, whether planned by Alfonso himself or agreed upon by his sons. The kingdom was split. Ordoño ruled Galicia and Portuguese lands, Fruela reigned over Asturias, and the eldest, Garcia, governed León, Castile, and Álava, being theoretically recognized as superior by his younger brothers. Thus, the Kingdom of Asturias gave way to the Kingdom of León.
The verdict.
In today's verdict, I want to put Alfonso III of Asturias' achievements into perspective. The great man theory that influenced so much historiography claimed that history was shaped by powerful individuals. Without denying that political leaders' decisions matter, the truth is everyone is a product of their society, of their own time. And the most important factors are socioeconomic, environmental, and of course, geopolitical conditions. It's like crediting Franco for Spain's 1960s growth, when all Western economies boomed during the golden age of capitalism. Alfonso III inherited a consolidated, expanded kingdom while the Emirate of Córdoba was collapsing, so it was relatively easy for him to integrate and conquer new territories. I don't think he was such an exceptional, great king. He was mostly favored by circumstances. So, how do you judge his reign? Let me know in the YouTube comments. And with that, the verdict ends. If you have made it this far, thank you. And hey, if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe to New History of Spain on podcast directories or on YouTube, where you will find more content besides this chronological series. You can help me keep going and cover expenses with a donation or becoming a Patreon with exclusive perks on patreon.com/newhistoryspain. Links are in the description. In the next episode, I will cover the story of the collapse of the Carolingian Empire and how the later Catalan counties became effectively independent under Wilfred the Hairy and others. See you soon!